Hey, welcome to Think Thursday from the Alcohol Minimalist Podcast. Think Thursday is all about your beautiful, brilliant human brain. We're talking neuroscience. We're talking behavior change. We are talking about your mindset. Are you ready to get started? Let's go. Hey there, it's Molly, and welcome back to Think Thursday. A couple of weeks ago on Think Thursday, we talked about something that I called the idea of just do the thing. And in that conversation, I briefly mentioned something called the Zeigarnik Effect. This idea that unfinished tasks tend to stick in your mind more than completed ones. The incomplete things create what we call open loops in the brain. And I realized after that episode that we didn't spend nearly enough time there talking about the Zeigarnik Effect. So that's what I want to talk about today, because that one concept explains so much of what people experience every day. Why your brain won't let things go, why you feel mentally busy even when you're not doing that much, why certain thoughts keep resurfacing, especially when you're trying to rest. So today, I want to slow down and take a deeper look at the Zeigarnik Effect, what it is, what's happening in your brain, and why understanding it might change the way you think about your mental load entirely. So the origin of the Zeigarnik Effect is kind of interesting, at least it is to me. This idea actually comes from a psychologist named Bluma Zeigarnik, and it was back in the 1920s. And the way she discovered it was kind of fascinating. She was sitting in a cafe in Vienna watching the waiters, and she noticed something interesting. The waiters seemed to have an incredible memory for orders that were still in progress. They could remember exactly who ordered what, even what hadn't been delivered yet, and what was still outstanding. But once the meal was served and the bill was paid, they forgot the details almost immediately. So Zeigarnik took this observation back to the lab and studied it more formally. What she found was that people consistently remembered unfinished or interrupted tasks far better than completed ones. Not because those tasks were more important, but because they were incomplete. They were still active in the brain. And when you think about it, that actually explains so much about how your own mind works, because your brain is doing something very similar. Anything unfinished stays active, not always in the front of your mind, the conscious part, but just under the surface. It's holding a bit of tension, keeping the tab open, so to speak, on your computer, right? Waiting for resolution. From a neuroscience perspective, your brain is constantly trying to predict and complete patterns. When something is left unfinished, it creates what we could call a small prediction error, a gap between what started and what hasn't been resolved yet. And the brain doesn't love gaps, so it keeps bringing that information back online, not to annoy you, but to complete the loop. This is where it starts to get relevant, right? Because a lot of what people describe as feeling overwhelmed isn't always about how much they have to do. It's about how many things feel unfinished. You can have a relatively light day in terms of actual workload, but if your brain is holding 10 open loops, an email you haven't responded to, a decision you've been avoiding, a conversation you need to have, a plan you keep postponing, that creates mental noise. And here's the important part. Those loops don't require your constant conscious attention to drain your energy. They sit in working memory, and they require monitoring. And monitoring consumes cognitive resources. So even when you're sitting on the couch trying to relax, your brain is quietly saying, don't forget that thing. You still need to figure that out. What are you going to do about that? And it creates this low-grade tension that can feel like anxiety or restlessness, or just a sense that you can't fully settle down. here's where it connects back to what we talked about before. You might assume that the only way to relieve the tension is to finish the task. But interestingly enough, that is not entirely true. Starting often reduces the tension more than finishing. Because the moment you begin, your brain updates the status of that loop. It moves from unresolved to in progress. And that shift matters. Even something as small as opening the document, drafting the first sentence, or sending the initial message tells your brain, this is moving. We're not ignoring it. And that reduces the need for constant mental monitoring. I've noticed this in my own life in really simple ways. There have been times when I've had something sitting in the back of my mind. Maybe it's outlining a podcast episode or responding to something that requires a little more thought. And I'll find myself thinking about it over and over again without actually starting. And it feels heavy. It feels like something I should be doing. But the moment I open the document, even if I only jot down a few rough ideas, the pressure drops almost immediately. Not because it's done, but because it's no longer floating out there. It has somewhere to go. And this leads to a really important distinction. There's a difference between an open loop and a contained loop. An open loop lives in your head. It's undefined, unscheduled, unresolved. A contained loop, on the other hand, has been captured. It's written down. It's scheduled. It has a next step. And your brain treats those differently. Because when something is contained, your brain doesn't have to keep bringing it back to your attention. It trusts that it's accounted for. This is why writing things down or putting them on a calendar can feel so relieving. You haven't finished the task, but you've given it structure. And structure reduces uncertainty. This ties back to something I said in that earlier episode. The nervous system relaxes when direction is chosen, not when outcomes are guaranteed. Your brain does not need you to have figured everything out, but it does know that something is in motion, that there is a path forward. Open loops keep the system activated. Direction allows it to settle. So here's what I want you to consider this week. Where are you carrying those open loops? Not in a judgmental way, just create some awareness. What is sitting in the background of your mind, quietly asking for resolution? And what would it look like, not to finish everything, but to either close the loop or contain it, to take one step, to define the next move, to give it somewhere to go? Because it's not always about doing more. Sometimes it's about reducing what your brain is trying to hold. Remember the previous episode on subtraction. A couple of weeks I told you to just do the thing. And today I want to add something to that. You don't always have to finish the thing to feel better, but your brain does like to know. That's the thing and it likes to know that the thing has somewhere to go. Closed or contained, because open loops create tension, but direction creates relief. That's all I have for you this week, my friends. Until next time, choose peace, and I will see you on Monday.